never had a traditional quote unquote real job. After graduating from college, I started a business nominated by Ernst & Young as being one of the nation's best seed stage companies. I created my first multi-million-dollar business at the age of 24. From that point, I continued to build and grow a number of different organizations until 2010. That's when somebody offered to pay me to help them grow their business, and I started Predictable Profits. We've taken several companies, put them on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list, and just with the work that we did in 2020, the International Business Times reached out and called me the go-to business coach for 7- and 8-figure companies. Disrupt magazine named me the top business coach for 7- and 8-figure companies. And I was listed among other folks like Tony Robbins, Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, a number of really wonderful, brilliant people. And that brings us to where we are today. And, typically people are coming to Predictable Profits asking themselves one of three questions. How do we grow my company faster? Or some months are feast, some months are famine. How do we bring more predictability into the revenue? Or the third one is, look, the company's just too dependent on me. How do we scale? And today we're talking about the state of the economy, which couldn't have been a more timely conversation.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We're going to get right into it right now, actually. We're going to have a conversation, but because my team was so kind to make this deck, I thought the least I can do is show it to y'all. So this is the state of the market for small business with Apprentice. That's me, and Predictable Profits. That's Charles. We told you a little bit about each of us, but this is a quick intro again to us. I think both of our pictures are a little we're taking a little while.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, my goatee doesn't have as much weight in that photo as it does in person.
I have most definitely aged since this. One of the funny things is I don't want to take too much time on this, but almost every speaker and author that I know has a headshot that was taken years ago. Very few of us are humble enough to use our true older selves. Topic for another story. So we're going to talk about threats to sustainability, give you guys some advice. And one thing, we don't have a lot of time today, but if you have a question that isn't covered by the questions that I've got for Charles here, post it in the chat, post it on LinkedIn. And even if we don't get to all your questions today live, we will do our darndest to get to you and get to your questions and answer them. So with that being said, Charles, tell us, when did you first notice that the economy was changing?
So actually in 2012 is when we first started to notice that the market was topping. And that's when we started to talk about the changing environment. And then in January, we were asked to speak to a group of entrepreneurs in Mexico, telling everybody, look, here's the deal. The market environment is changing, which it's not that we've got a crystal ball or we have any ability to be able to necessarily see inside the future. It's just that we have the unique opportunity of speaking with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the course of, weeks and months. And when one person sees something, it's one thing, but when we start to see trends, it's completely something else.
Yeah. That's so that's a good amount of time. 10 years ago now.
Oh no, not 2000. Did I say 2012? I meant, sorry.
I think you meant 2022. 20.
Did I tell you I was dyslexic? I'm dyslexic. 21.
21.
So,
okay.
So just a few months ago.
That makes a lot more sense to me. So, obviously we're coming out of a global pandemic. I mean, lots of people lost their jobs. We've got the confluence of factors between the global pandemic, the great resignation, the sort of startup and gig economy. It's a really interesting time to be a small business owner. What do you think is the biggest difference between a sort of good economy and a bad economy? I think many people are scared right now that we are in the process of a bad economy and a long-term recession. What are the key differences that you see?
So it's a really great question. And I want to just kind of point this out from the start, that it's never really a matter of a good economy or a bad economy. It's ultimately, just a different economy, and there's going to be opportunities in any sort of economic situation. The reason why just a few months ago, in December, we said that the market was topping is because we noticed that the consumers were discerning. They're taking a little bit longer to make buying decisions, and there's a lot more other things that we can go into in a little bit, should you be interested. But that's the primary thing. When we look at the difference between a good economy and a bad economy, one of the things that we notice is that right off the bat, your buyers are starting to tighten their belts. And in tightening their belts, they have to be much more careful in the choices that they're making when they're making buying decisions. So they're a lot more discerning, which a discerning consumer means that they're going to spend more time educating themselves to make sure that they're making a smart decision. And so if you want to provide a strategic advantage for yourself and your business, understand how the consumers have changed and be there as the resource for information, letting them know why it's a smart decision right now to invest in your product and service in your company and so forth. And but you really have to understand what is the information that they're looking for that's going to empower them to be able to make that decision.
I love that, and it's really interesting. We actually noticed our customers at Apprentice were absolutely getting more discerning and it was taking longer time on our sales cycle.
For sure.
One thing we did in response to that, we have a membership fee that runs almost $2,000, $1,999 for the year. We used to charge that all up front, and that was the only option. We saw that felt like a bigger investment maybe now than it would have felt 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And so we essentially cut our initial deposit by a lot. So instead of putting $19.99 down, you're putting $400 down, and immediately we were able to see significant improvement in a higher conversion rate and a slower and a faster sales cycle. And so it's a matter of, that's an example of taking what Charles is saying. You get that. Once you understand the insight about folks being more discerning, how does that impact your pricing and your sales process? And if you can make those changes relatively quickly, you can actually see results, as we did, very quickly.
Well, let's actually keep on that topic for 1 minute, if we might. So, in the very beginning, if you're in B2B sales, when you're selling to the end user or to the decision maker, it's a very quick decision making process over and over again. But what happens in a down market is you're not just selling to the decision maker anymore. Now you're going to have to sell to somebody else in the company, which ultimately is the CFO, because the CFO is the one that is saying, hey, we need to tighten our belts. We're going to pull back on the budget and whatnot. And so when you're not dealing with the decision maker, and even when you are, actually, the conversation tends to go not just in the benefits and the attributes of what it is that you're offering, but now there's much more weight on an ROI justification. So if I'm going to spend X amount of money, $2,000 or $400 on a deposit, how soon am I going to get my money back? What is a reasonable expectation? And that's going to have to be, pretty well articulated. And why is bringing in somebody, for example, an apprentice, why is that going to be much more cost effective than if I was going to take another route or an alternative route? So these are the type of discussions that they're having internally and trying to make smart decisions. So in our sales conversations, we want to make sure that that's well articulated.
Makes sense, and that's actually a perfect segue for my next question, Charles. What is the best way to attract buyers in a down economy?
So here's the beautiful thing. I've been quoted multiple times, and people often think it's a misquote, but it is the truth. And I'll go on record saying that I love a bad economy. I get juiced and excited, and I look forward to, and I said bad, but again, a down economy, right? Because it's not good or bad. but a down economy because most of the competition begins to pull back. They cut away their marketing and advertising. They start laying off people, and it starts to reduce the noise. And so, recessions, when you're leaning in, it allows you to capture more market share more efficiently and easier than in up markets. And so, the last thing that you want to do is pull back on what's worked, on what's brought you in customers and clients and the whole deal. What you want to do is to be able to lean in a little bit more. As we talked before, it's, how has the buyer changed and what do we need to do in order to match the message with the market? So their problems have changed. The problems are different 6 months ago than they were today. So you've got to adapt the message to meet the message with the market. As you talked about, maybe you change your pricing structures to create more flexible pricing plans or whatever that might be. Educating the market, again, that's the biggest thing. Consumers are more discerning. But we also do want to make sure that we take the focus off of price alone and more so on why it's the smartest decision to do business with you at this moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is if you can afford it, and hopefully you can afford it if you're in business, leaning into the most efficient way that you've gotten results in the past could actually present a bigger opportunity than it has in the past to capture market share in a down economy.
Many of the smartest entrepreneurs on the planet, Jack Welch, and maybe not entrepreneur, but CEO, right? Jack Welch, Warren Buffett, and Richard Branson, for example, those three people always talk about never waste an opportunity like a good recession. And so many of today's greatest companies grew in recessions. If we just take a step back and we look at 2020 was absolutely devastating for the majority of the businesses out there. But in every industry, regardless of what was going on, you are going to find that there are breakouts. If you think about the hardest hit industries in 2020, the restaurants and travel were hit pretty much harder than all the others. And yet we have a client in the restaurant business that had his best year he's ever had. In fact, not too long ago, we were sitting there at one of his restaurants and he said, if I had to do it all over again, I would absolutely welcome 2020 because he adapted and he changed. We have a client in the travel space, literally international travel. Can you imagine being in an international travel business when you only get paid putting people on a plane, and yet borders were shut down, planes are grounded, and you can't fly people? So he literally called me up, Harold disheveled, asked me, just tell me point blank, tell me, am I out of business? And if you are, I'll lay everybody off. I'll close all the offices and everything else. And I said, right now is the best time in the world for you to be in business because those competitors are going to scale back and whatnot. And sure enough, his largest competitors worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they went out of business within weeks. He ended up in the middle of a pandemic when things are shut down, having broke the record for the most amount of sales daily, weekly, and monthly, having one of his most profitable years ever. And the reason why that is, he changed the message to meet the market. He said, I know we can't put you on a plane now, but what we can do is you're looking forward to going somewhere when this is over. So we'll make sure you cut the line, and because there's going to be a mass rush, and we'll help you plan it, and you can do it. So as long as you change a little bit,
right,
meet them where they're at, you can absolutely always find a way to make things work.
Right. So don't. I'll caveat what I said a moment ago. I said, lean into the most efficient way that you've known to generate business. But I'll caveat that by saying, once you understand how the down economy has changed your customers' problem and their needs, and therefore how you can adapt to meet those changing needs and problems.
Absolutely, for sure.
Awesome. Let's talk about price for a moment. I think it's very tempting when times are more challenging to lower your prices. What's your perspective on whether a business owner should lower their prices in an attempt to keep up in a challenging economy?
So our general rule of thumb is to answer the question, how do you become the most expensive competitor in the industry and still have people lining up to do business with you? Now, right away, when I say this, most entrepreneurs, they get this little bit of a flutter in their chest because, there's this understanding that if I lower my prices, I'll end up getting more buyers. But that's only when you make price the focus of your sales conversation, instead of talking about the value and the benefits and being, that much more superior to that of your competitors. Probably one of the best examples that I can give people happens to come from one of the wealthiest companies in the world, Apple, right? And so Apple launched one of the most expensive smartphones that the world had ever seen back in the middle of the housing crisis of 2008. At this point, people were literally losing their houses. They didn't have money to pay their electrical bills. They're laid off. They're, scrambling for pennies between the seat cushions and whatnot. But Apple decides they're going to run this smartphone and they're going to sell it anyway. And what happened? They had people lining up on the streets for blocks waiting to get access to this smartphone, even though much of America didn't have the money to do so. Many of those people in line didn't have the money to do so. But there's this general rule of thumb that holds true no matter what. People always find the money for things that are most important to them. In this case, Apple said, you don't want a dumb phone. What you need is a smartphone. A smartphone will make you more productive, the envy of your friends, the whole deal. They made the focus on that. People didn't even really know what they were spending their money on, how much money it cost and so forth. They just knew they were buying a smartphone. They didn't go into Apple and try to negotiate the prices. They didn't read this long piece of sales copy. They weren't sort of enticed by this timer and this hype and all this other stuff that marketers make us believe needs to be true in order to get a sale. Instead, Apple sells the most expensive thing on the market, smartphone at the market at the time. People are tripping over themselves trying to get access to it because they made their product a must-have, not a nice-to-have. And so when you make your product or service a must-have, and I mean, they did it off of an iPhone. You can do this out of almost anything. When you put the focus on the value and how you're fundamentally transforming somebody's life, their business, whatever that might be, people will do it. People will find the money in order to do business with you. Now, Apple, if they wrapped their products, and I'm going to offend some people here, so I apologize ahead of time for offending some people here, but if they packaged and wrapped their products like an Android, they probably wouldn't be able to command the prices that they did, at least in Android back then.
Yeah.
Because they came in your typical, like very thin cardboard box, a presentation, but they made it feel premium right off the bat. Everything, every little detail. And so people were happy to spend that much money.
Love that story.
You do have to look at the experience and everything.
We actually, it's funny, at Apprentice, so we supply college students that serve in a wide variety of areas: marketing, sales, biz dev, operations, data and analysis. And but we're far from the least expensive option in the market. I mean, you want to have a virtual assistant in the Philippines. It's a fraction of the cost. So like you're saying, we tend to not compete on cost, but we actually just changed the first slide in our deck. Again, thinking through not only the down economy, but really, to your point, is of a moment ago, hitting what was going to emotionally resonate the most in terms of value. So for the first year and 3/4, nearly 2 years of our business, the first slide of our sales deck, which I'm sure we showed you when you came on as a customer, was make your life easier and more effective, which is great. People want to make their life easier and more effective. But we dug deeper and we just rebranded that first slide as get more time, more freedom, and more success. Because at the end of the day, it's that more time and freedom that people really want. That's what they want. They want to be able to offload all the stuff that's not producing, that's not enjoyable and not producing the biggest impact on their business. and we were able to hone in on that. I don't know yet what the results will be, but I hope and suspect if there's a slight fraction of Apple's results on their last smartphone, then I will be very, very happy. Let's jump to it.
Let me give you a suggestion on this one. I'm gonna give you some pre-coaching advice on this one.
I love live coaching in front of an audience.
I love the idea. I love what you're saying about, more time and whatnot. Survey your clients. Ask them how much time they've actually saved as a result of working with your clients. And now this way, instead of saying more time, you could say our average client has saved an average of, 26 hours per week or per month or whatever as a result of working with their apprentice. They value their time at approximately $500 an hour. Therefore, or the average apprentice is saving our clients over $10,000 a month in how they value the time. Now it's very easy ROI justification.
Right. Well, thank you. I think I just doubled my price. So your royalty checks will come in right after. No, it's great. All right. Before we move on, we have a question from one of our guests. He says, the Apple Store is a great one. What about an example for a service-based business in order to make it a must-have? Although I'd like to think that we just supplied one with Apprentice, but do you have another one up your sleeve, Charles, in terms of at the level of Apple or somewhere near the level of how a service-based business can make themselves a must-have?
Sure. If you want to tell me the business that you're in, I can make it more relevant to the business that you're in. But I just had this conversation with the owner of a PR agency, and he said, okay, because PR is notoriously seen as nice to have, not necessarily a must have. And so he says, all right, so how do we make PR to be a must have instead of a nice to have? I said, well, let's take a step back for a minute. What do we know about today's discerning consumer? He's like, well, they're doing more research. I said, right. So let me ask you, what's more important for me to be able to say, hey, look, I am the best in the business, or is it more important for somebody else to say it for me? Which one makes a bigger impact? He says, well, when somebody else says it for you. But right, isn't that what PR can do? PR can actually shorten the sales cycle by ultimately having the message being out there by other people, validating, building authority and credibility, therefore helping the discerning consumer assign preference over to you.
Love it. And by the way, not just other people, other more credible, essentially the most credible people around when it comes to when you're talking about the media.
Right. I mean, when I look at some of the press that's come out recently, putting the value on that, for my business has been instrumental. It helps, shorten the sales cycle, and people want to sit back and go, why is it a smart decision to do business with you? And more specifically, what makes you the best? So let me back up for a minute, because there is something that I said about being the best. And you talked about price earlier. Google did a study, and I would encourage our listeners to do the same thing. Go to Google Trends, so trends.google.com. Type in the words cheap, and then do a comparison against the word best. And one thing you're going to notice is go back as far along in history as possible. And you're going to see that there's an ongoing trend for people looking for the best, and there's a declining trend for people looking for the cheapest. In other words, what does that tell you? It's more important for today's consumer to find the best than the cheapest. And guess what? That trend continued in 2008 and in 2020. We have every reason to believe that trend's going to continue now. People are looking for the best. So, that's another thing I want to make sure that that's mentioned.
Love that. Jimmy, we don't have enough time to answer your question in greater detail. I'll invite you to connect with me and or Charles afterwards. I'm happy to get into it. I'll just say very briefly, since you mentioned that you have a membership and business training for small business community, I would think through what the results will be. What will be the results for your members in terms of what will be the results of that training, the results of membership in the community that make it a must-have for them. Before we wrap, Charles, last question for you today, sir. And then, by the way, stay tuned because I have an offer and a prize to give away to one person that's watching live, so don't go anywhere. Where do you see the economy going in the next 12 months? If you had, I know, it's the tough question. But if you had the crystal ball right now, we're recording this. We'll come back and check up on it a year from now. Where do you think we're going, my friend?
Well, as you can see by my shirt, I believe in results. So in other words, I like to focus on the data and make data-based decisions. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, they do a study for small business optimism. And what they found, they projected out and asked people, where do you think the economy is going to be at least 6 months from now? Are you hopeful? Do you think it's going to go up, down, whatever? And what they found is that this is the highest degree of pessimism that has ever been recorded in the 48-year history of doing the survey. In other words, more business owners than ever are pessimistic in the outlook, which tells me that the next 6 months, if business owners are skeptic, they're going to pull back on much of their consumption. They're going to reserve it for must-have. So we know what the next 6 months are going to happen. I did an informal poll inside of LinkedIn, and the vast majority of those people, I think it was like 70-something% or whatever, believed that the next 12 months are going to go down. Regardless of whatever the economic data has to say, this can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if consumers, if entrepreneurs, if CEOs don't believe that the outlook of the economy is going to be one that is going to go up, then they're going to make buying decisions that ultimately end up impacting it. So my opinion is that I wouldn't be surprised if it's flat or down. I would be surprised if the economy continued to rocket ship up as it has been in the past.
Well, I think the good news is, as we've talked about before, is just because the economy is going down and people are pessimistic doesn't mean you can't have the very best year of your business's life if you think through that more discerning customer and you think through how to lean into your most efficient way to reach your customers and to market and to sell. So on that note, I am super excited to share an offer. And Charles, you're going to be impressed with our technology. For the first time ever during a live webinar, a QR code. That's right. So scan this code right here, or go to stateofthemarket.live, or you can just scan the code with your phone. I think it's going to actually work. And if you book a demo and end up joining us, you get your first 40 hours complimentary with a signing up for 6 months or more. It's a pretty good deal, if I do say so myself. And thank you, by the way, for your very, very kind words. I know you've been with Apprentice for over a year now.
Over a year.
Yeah,
over a year. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your business, and I appreciate you taking some time with us today. We're going to give away one copy of Likeable Social Media 3rd edition to somebody that is watching live. And post in the chat. The first person that posts the number between 1 and 20 that I am thinking of. Charles, would you like to add anything to the mix? No pressure. But would you like to add anything to the prize mix in there?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you what. If you go to predictableprofits.com, we have an assessment right there. If you want to take the assessment, and then that will give you an opportunity later to have a free coaching and consulting call with us. Feel free to do that. If you make mentions that you were on this webinar, I will find something to sweeten the deal as well, and give you some sort of resource that we have that normally you'd have to pay for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will give away the book as well. I want to thank the folks from Apprentice that helped set this up. And I want to thank Charles very, very much for joining us. And most of all, I want to thank you guys, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recording. I very, very much appreciate you spending some time with me. And I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.